Welcome back for another episode of Think on These Things. As we read through and walk through the Bible, we're coming up on the end of the year, just a few more weeks left. Thank you for joining us again. We're excited to do this together as we share different insights of things that we have discovered as we've walked through the scriptures and spent time with the Lord on these passages. And this week, one of the passages we read was Lamentations. And in Lamentations chapter 3 particularly stood out to me. And I'm just going to kind of walk through the first several verses and highlight the brokenness that the author experienced. Now, we don't know if it's just the author himself or if he's representing the people of God holistically. Either way, I believe the experiences and the emotions that this author is expressing are things that we can often relate to as we live a life in a broken world. And for some of us who have lived a life in rebellion against God and experienced those seasons of just absolute despair and brokenness in that regard as well. But look what the author writes. In verse 1, they've seen affliction. 2, they're driven and brought into darkness. Their flesh and skin waste away. Verse 4, their bones feel broken. They have been besieged and enveloped with bitterness and tribulation. They dwell in darkness. They're walled about so they cannot escape. Their chains are heavy. They have their prayers shut out. All these are expressions of feelings, just similar to the psalmist that they have in relationship to God, that they just feel absolutely, utterly distant from God. Do you ever have those moments in life where God seems to be so far away? Not only does God feel far away, but in this text, God feels like he's against them. Have you ever had those moments where God feels like he's against you? The author goes on, he continues. Says, he's blocked my ways with blocks of stone. My paths are crooked. He's torn me to pieces. He's made me desolate. He sets me as a target for his arrows. Verse 13, his arrows driven deep into my kidney. I become a laughingstock to all people. I'm filled with bitterness. My teeth grind on gravel. He's made me cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. And listen to this. The height of despair, I have forgotten what happiness is. Verse 18. So I say, what is our response in these seasons where these experiences, these circumstances, these emotions, whether these circumstances are imagined or whether they are real, when the darkness of life overtakes our soul, what is the author of Lamentations? What's his response to that? So I say, he says, my endurance has perished. I've got nothing left. But then look what he says, my hope is from the Lord. I've got nothing left, but I still know that my hope, and for biblical authors, hope is not just some wishful thinking. It's not like when you get on that rickety ride and you're like, oh my goodness, I hope this roller coaster doesn't fly off the rails, right? I mean, we've all had that experience. Or someone's walking down the hall and let's say they got a boyfriend or girlfriend that they're interested in. They're like, man, I hope they like me. Or you come home and, hey, I hope the power bill's not that much today. It's not that kind of hope. It's not wishful thinking. The biblical hope is this confident expectation of something to come that is yet unrealized. In the midst of all of this despair, what I'm reminded is, in the midst of all of the circumstances of life, my hope, it can't be in my wealth. It can't be in my spouse. It can't be in my intellect. It can't be in my physical health. It can't be in others. It can't be in my pastor. It can't be in my parents. My hope has to be in the Lord. He says in verse 22, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Therefore, I will hope in him. After all of that litany of despair, after all of that brokenness, after all of that just verbal vomiting of horror, the steadfast love of the Lord endures forever. My hope is in him because his faithfulness is great. See, God is sovereign and God is gracious And God is faithful to his covenant people. So this week, I oftentimes, if you follow along and see many of mine, I end with a couple of questions. I don't have any questions this week to end with that I asked myself. The thing I was encouraged to do was to go look up and listen to the song, Great is Thy Faithfulness. It's an old hymn. And I would encourage you to do that. Great is his faithfulness. And let's take some time, regardless of how we feel. Maybe you're at a great place in life. You're on the mountaintop. Praise him. Maybe you're in the valley. Can we praise him? Because great is his faithfulness. Well, I hope this episode of Think on These Things has been encouraging to you today. If you would like to find out more about the John W. Rawlings School of Divinity, please check us out at www.liberty.edu/divinity.